so very much for coming. I'm so pleased for Bernie, because I know he's watching us, to see such a wonderful turnout this afternoon. And wow, it was 95 years ago today that Bernie was born, because this is his birthday. Indeed, this is January 27th, and it was his birthday. And he would have been 95 had he lived quite this long. My name is Craig Johnson, for those of you that don't know me. I was privileged to have known Bernie since I was enrolled as a student at Duquesne University in 1976. And since then, he has been a mentor and a great friend to me, and someone I love very dearly. He touched the lives of so many people, as is obvious by your being here today. And not only his hundreds of flute students over the years, but his colleagues in the Pittsburgh Symphony, students in his chamber music classes, thousands of people in the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony and Three Rivers Training Orchestra, and so many other ways that it's really impossible to measure. If you didn't already, please sign the guest book that we have here. So we have a memento for the family. That would be really great. And many of you already have a name tag. It's optional. If you want to wear a name tag, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But I know that there's a lot of friends here. This is in some ways a reunion for a lot of us. And some of us do change over the years. So, sometimes name tags come in handy. There's also a donation jar by the stairs as you came in. That's there because we're collecting donations in order to have bricks engraved outside of Heinz Hall. You might have noticed that when you came in, or people that come to the concerts here, I'm sure know about those bricks, but it will have a person's name in honor or in memory of. So we're hoping to have several, at least, bricks engraved outside of Heinz Hall in Bernie's memory. After all, he spent so many years here. After the musical tribute of the Bach Sonata, we invite anyone that wishes to say a few words to please do so. We're going to invite anyone that wishes to come up to the mic to please share some memories, because I know that all of us have stories to tell about Bernie and what we did over the years, and what he said, and we have a lot of great memories. I also invite you to stay for a reception in the next room after the formal part of the program is concluded. And please take a look at the memorabilia that we have here today. These are all items from his house. There are 4 tables, 2 on this side, 2 on the other side of the center walls there, with some great photographs of Bernie and people that meant a lot to him over the years. Some plaques, some clippings. One of my favorites is a clipping of Bernie when he was a flute player in high school. He's got his band uniform on, so you got to see that. So again, thank you so much for coming, and I would now like to invite Wendy Coomer to the podium. Wendy.
Thank you, Craig. And I'm of the age. We no longer read with our regular glasses. We are gathered here today to honor the life of our beloved friend, relative, colleague, mentor, teacher, director, and coach, Bernard Goldberg. For those of us who are privileged to have been students in his flute studio, we mourn his loss most acutely, since he is and has been a part of our daily flute lives for many, many decades. We can hear him, just show of hands, is anybody here from Bernie's flute studio? Raise your hand if you've ever studied with Bernie. All right, well, you're my crowd. Can you just hear him in your mind? I think today we'll begin with some long tones. How about some de la sonorité? And then followed by a chaser of Taffano Goldberg scales, the five-note studies in major and minor, the scale system from memory, sometimes with wacky articulations, groups of 7, groups of 9. What was he thinking? Chromatics, trills, and arpeggios. And then on to our etudes, lots and lots of Anderson, lots of Berbier, finding the melodic line, understanding where the chords were leading us. He was asking us to hear and feel the chord progressions and the chord changes during everything we played, hear the harmony. He would ask us to heed his corrections immediately, not bring it back next week, fix it now. And especially if it was something, a horrendous error like playing F sharp with our middle finger in a 30-second note run, perhaps, that he would point out. Or maybe our first finger was a little slow. We all remember that. He would ask us to, we can hear him asking us to notice our pitch and be careful of our pitch, and asking us to respect the composer and respect the composer's style, tempo, color, and phrasing. It's not about us. It's about honoring the person who wrote this piece. He also asked us to prepare most carefully and to avoid errors in our practicing, because those would certainly come out in our performing if they were there when we practiced. And I don't know about you, but I think Bernie possessed some amazing, superhuman, extraordinary skills. See if some of you can relate to these. How about Mr. Goldberg's fastest solfege ever? He could solfege like the solo part from the Mozart G major concerto, but he could also solfege the introduction violin part. And then he could do the viola part from the Griffiths poem, but it was fastest do-re-mi ever born. I'm absolutely positive. When he would conduct, he solfeged everybody's part for them. It was crazy. And how, okay, I can't do this, I'm not very good at this, but I'm sure there's someone who's perfected this. That weird clicking thing he did so that you'd stay on tempo. Right? It's not, that doesn't do, is anybody good at that? He was amazing, and I think he could do 16th note clicks at quarter note equals 212. I think I clocked him once. He could click, 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 click to keep us on the beat, and especially if he had syncopation. And how about another extraordinary characteristic? He could be 5 rooms away with closed doors, the phone ringing. He could be chatting with his little, for a while he had a little toy poodle, and he would be sizzling up chicken, cooking for the dog. You'd be in the front parlor having your lesson. You're thinking, oh, he's not even paying attention. So you just kind of noodle away and play. And he'd say, your first finger was late and measure 10. He could hear through 5 rooms. I still shake if my first finger's down. I never hear it. And he's still hearing it, I'm sure. He could also invent a bass line to anything you were playing. You could make up a melody and he'd have to be singing and humming a bass line alongside of you. That was pretty extraordinary. He also, I don't know if he ever did this for you, but he completely crazy. He wanted my tongue to be pointier. Does anybody who remembers pointy tongueness? And he wanted to use, he didn't call it this, but this is what he expected. Think your tongue pointy. The think method. And then he would stick his tongue out and it looked like a serpent's tongue. It came to like a chiseled point. Now I want to show you, I've had 40 some years to perfect my think method for my pointy tongue. Not so successful, but that was one of his superhuman traits. Also his memory for repertoire and conductors and stories. Unbelievable memory for music and for things that happened. Every performance he was ever in, remembered everything about it. But his most super acute characteristic was his hearing for pitch deviations. We could never, ever be, or even himself could never be in tune enough. He always wants to be caring about intonation. I also recall some humorous moments in my decades with Bernie. When I was studying with him at Duquesne in the 70s, I was, I guess, a very earnest student, and he would shake his head, and Wendy, 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 Wendy. And you can insert your name here if this happened to you too. If flute playing were as complicated and difficult as you are making it, it would have died out centuries ago. I think he was suggesting I relax a bit. But he was pretty dramatic about that. Also those moments when he would cavort and dance and leap about the room, singing the line and showing you where the phrase went. Epic moments in studio time. Sometimes he would ease the tension a bit. Most of the tension was his, because he wasn't liking what he was hearing, but he would kind of walk around the room muttering and sometimes telling a ribald joke or two, which we politely laughed but never got. But he did a lot of mumbling. Maybe that didn't happen at your lessons. Perhaps it was just me. But I thought it was pretty funny. And here, everyone who studied with Bernie, whether at his home or at his studio at Duquesne or Carnegie Mellon, he often would be late or not show up at all. And then when he did finally arrive, what was his excuse? I'm sorry, I couldn't find a place to park. He told me once that he quit CMU. He had taught at CMU and then moved to Duquesne in the 70s or maybe in the late 60s because the parking was better. I have no idea if that was true, but that's what he said. So he was known to quit jobs over parking problems. Also, when I was a junior at Duquesne, part of the school handbook said that I had to play all 6 Bach sonatas before I graduated. And I hadn't started them yet. I think I was still busy doing De la Sonorité and some Tafnam Goldberg, and I thought, we've got to hop too, I've got to learn these Bach sonatas. I was, of course, learning them surreptitiously on the side. I had them memorized, but I hadn't played them for him yet. So I said, cautiously, well, do you think we could maybe get to a Bach sonata this year? Come back in 20 years. So, 20 years later, fast forward, Wendy and Bernie were doing a high school music camp at Duquesne University, and I was walking down the hall with them, and I reminded him about this story. He said, oh, did I say that to you? And I said, well, yeah, I wouldn't remember it. I said it was pretty biting then, and I understood that I still played a lot of French music, but we had not done Bach. And I said, I have a huge favor to ask. And he said, well, do you want to play them for me now? And I said, no, I want another 20 years. So 2 summers ago, I threw a bunch of students in the car, and we drove down to West Virginia where he was holding his summer master class, and I told him I was coming, and he almost always wore his summer camp from 20 years before, his Wendy Coomer flute camp shirt that day, and he had it on, and honored my coming that day with some students, and I asked him if I could play. I was 60, I was ready to play Bach, and would he be happy to listen to it, and he was, and it was an epic day, and I'm so glad I seized that moment. I'm not sure he was happy, but I was very pleased to have that time to play for him. Also, we remember Bernie's intense and unending generosity. There are thousands of great stories that everyone here in this room can tell of a time that Bernie was generous with them and some extraordinary thing he did for them. He rented out rooms to students in his rambling Victorian, and let's all say the address, 6310 Darlington. And what color were those numbers? Pink. He would lend flutes and piccolos to students, sometimes for the entirety of their undergraduate years. He did this in Brooklyn, he did it in Pittsburgh. He would lend them to students in their youth symphony or tripo if they needed a better instrument. If you were playing something new that he found in a drawer and he said, here, try this, you would play that piece for him and he'd say, wow, this is beautiful. He'd hand it to you. Here, take it. He would give away music. He invited us, his door was always open, and he invited us into his home for lessons. The rest of our lives, we could always go back and study with Bernie. And as I like to say, his door was always open, you could always go in. He wasn't always there. He had some trouble keeping a calendar. But eventually you would get that lesson, maybe not that day, but you'd make another appointment. He also was excellent about offering scholarships for lessons. In the early days, he called it the Barrere Scholarship, and students, deserving students would be the recipient of these wonderful lessons. And he continued the Barrere Scholarship through 2016, so that was pretty amazing. So in my thoughts about Bernie as I was preparing for today, which it's very difficult for most of us to say goodbye to Bernie because he has been such a presence. He was so involved in the flute community, locally and globally. When he moved to Pittsburgh as a young man, he helped resurrect the Pittsburgh Flute Club and remained president emeritus until he died in November, giving master classes and offering his advice and help with activities with the Flute Club his whole entire life. He also helped found the National Flute Association and was one of its first presidents back in 1974. He was instrumental in he founded the Three Rivers Young People's Orchestra and continued on as a coach through 2016, every Saturday with them as a woodwind coach. And he was just so incredibly giving and cared about young musicians and training them properly and making sure that flutists had the proper training and everything that they needed. And if it was within his sphere, he gave it to them. So those were some. Oh, he also did the Asian Youth Symphony. I was looking on their website. I knew he had been going over to exotic places, and there are testimonials from years ago from students who had studied in woodwind sections with Bernie in the Asian Youth Orchestra. So that was pretty exciting too. So in my final thoughts, when Bernie was 92 years old, he was still managing and teaching a week-long summer masterclass in West Virginia that offered Alexander technique, virtuosity classes, Moïse studies, and lots of listening to old vinyl recordings of flutists and opera divas. He hired a professional accompanist and coached each student every day. Some classes went well into the evening. His tireless efforts and devotion were evident in his teaching methods and heartfelt reminiscences. He would love to tell stories. His Moïse stories, the recounting of incidences with famous conductors, his favorite symphonic moments held everyone in thrall. Many of the young flutists there had no idea who these long-dead artists were, but they were still held captivated by Mr. Goldberg's zeal and his emotional outpouring about the music that these people created. Bernie's contributions to the world of music are lifelong and manifold. They will be cherished and passed on through his students, and their students. It is a rich and rewarding legacy. We are grateful to have been in his sphere. Thank you.
The next speaker, I'm very pleased to welcome some members of Bernie's family here to Pittsburgh to be with us this afternoon. And I would like now to invite Warren Goldberg up to the microphone to say a few words.
I'm Warren Goldberg, and this is my daughter, Marnie, and her husband, Brian. Very happy to be here from St. Louis. I'm here and some reading some letters from the other cousins. Bernard was from Belleville, which is right near St. Louis, so he had a lot to do with the St. Louis community and also the Belleville community. So I'm going to go ahead and read what I have here. I would like to thank everybody who's here. It's really a terrific turnout. Thank you. And thanks to all who helped arrange this memorial service for us. And I want to particularly thank Greg and Wendy and Tom Dennis, who's standing over there, who helped take care of Bernard in the later years. He was an extremely helpful man, very kind.
Yes.
Thank you. Bernard and my wife were extremely close, and they always telephoned each other every Sunday. When my wife, Marcia, became very ill, the calls were more frequent, and in the weeks just before she died, last July, it was every day. Sorry. He was a regular at our Seder table every year, and it was always a visit to be treasured. Both of them will be greatly missed this year. And now I'll read letters from this is from his nephew. Good afternoon, and a sincere thank you for coming here to celebrate Bernard Goldberg. My name is Sylvan Goldberg. This is speaking for him, a nephew and eldest member of Bernard's family. my brother Sandy Goldberg and his sister Paula Schneider, who are unable to be here today, but ask that I pass along their appreciation for this wonderful event. I'd like to very briefly share with you 2 personal experiences with my dear uncle, and then some introspection on the musician. When Sandy and I were quite young, we enjoyed Bernard's occasional overnight visits to our hometown in Belleville, which, by the way, was also his hometown. And Sandy and I would get up before the rest of the family, go racing into the bedroom occupied by Bernard. We jumped on him while he was still sleeping and kept yelling, "We're going to make barbecue ribs out of you." And then to this day, I'm amazed that he was such a good sport about being awoke in this manner. I really think he was truly delighted with our antics. Every so often, Bernard enjoyed teasing me by singing the following little song to the melody of the national anthem. And I'll save you the agony of me singing, so I'll picture the national anthem while I sing this. Oh, say, can you see any dead bugs on me? You can pick a few for me, and I'll fry them for you. All of you flutists with us today, did you ever sing that one for you? And now about Bernie the musician. Every time he visited us, I always got my best music lesson. Not a clarinet lesson, still was a clarinet lesson. He brought such a wonderful insight, and in every delightful manner. And then there was a time that when a large box arrived at our home, and it was addressed to me. Inside were several LP recordings of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. These were made during the era of William Steinberg and Capitol Records. Recordings included Beethoven's 5th, 6th, and 8th symphonies, Tchaikovsky's 5th and 6th symphonies, violin concertos of Bruch, Dvorak, Glazunov, and Mendelssohn, and my favorite, Rachmaninoff's 2nd Symphony. I still feel that recording is the gold standard. Today, the LPs are gone, but I have acquired their commercially reproduced versions in CD format, and with the original artwork used on those LP jackets. What a treasure trove. And then there was a time that Bernard borrowed my portable music stand to take with him when he participated in the Pablo Casals Bach Festival in France. When Bernard returned it to me, he mentioned that Maestro Casals had borrowed it from Bernard. I never wanted to touch that music stand again. I was in such awe. And finally, Bernard came to California in 1995 to perform with the community orchestra of which I was a member. He chose Mozart's Flute Concerto No. 1 in G. I had the honor to introduce Bernard to the whole orchestra just before the rehearsal began. I also felt compelled to point out that he chose a piece that did not include plays. I guess he didn't want to take any chances. And I have one from his niece Paula, also in California. Thank you all who have assembled here today. I guess just like me, you were a big fan of my Uncle Bernard. When I was a child, he also seemed so exotic to me. Arriving in St. Louis, my grandparents' home for the large family gatherings that my Grandma Bessie and Grandpa Charlie, there are pictures of them out there, held every December. Uncle Bernard would regale us with funny musical stories, thereby opening a world to me that I never knew existed. It became a tradition with us throughout the years. Every time we were together, I expected him to tell me a few anecdotes. Maintaining family connections, Uncle Bernie would call home during the first Passover Seder. Everyone wanted to talk with him, and he would be patient and engaging with each of us. And that was in the days when of really costly long-distance telephone calls. Several years ago, I hosted a Seder, and sure enough, Uncle Bernie called. Stupid mobile phone, I missed the call. It's probably at our house. During his years of traveling with the Pittsburgh Symphony, Uncle Bernard sent me postcards and occasionally a small gift. I still have many of his cards and treasure his thoughtful gifts. It's a beautiful legacy. An enduring legacy is the time he visited when my son was 3 or 4 years old. Uncle Bernard began playing the melody to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then segued into Mozart's variations. Max was so surprised at the same time transfixed, and to express himself he began playing all over the sofa. A gift to be treasured and never forgotten. To those of you who have maintained contact with Uncle Bernard throughout the years and treated him on his birthdays, a heartfelt thank you. Thank you very much. He always loved talking about his former pupils and his birthday celebration. Most sincerely, his niece, Paula Goldberg.
Thank you, Warren. Lauren, for sharing those beautiful family memories with us. We really appreciate that. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you a very distinguished flutist, internationally known flutist, who is visiting here in Pittsburgh this weekend to present master classes at Carnegie Mellon University and Duquesne University. He was invited here by Lorna McGee, and I'm very pleased to welcome William Bennett to say a few words.
Well, good afternoon. This is a great, how about this? Or projection. I don't really know what to say because I only met Bernard Goldberg about 2 or 3 times in my life. And it's all in connection with our mutual God, who you've been watching on the screen over there, Marcel Moyes, my personal God of the flute, and I believe Bernard's too. I met him at gatherings in Switzerland after Moyes' masterclasses, and once in Saint-Amour in France. And I can only say that we're both following the same path, and what Wendy Kuma's been saying seems to be all a very good expression of everything I thought about God, Marcel Moyes. Seems to be doing all the same things, so you picked up the right things. Thank you. So let's wish him a happy ride up to heaven.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. At this time, I'd like to invite Lorna to say a few words, and then she can also invite her colleagues to come up after she's finished speaking to perform a beautiful musical tribute to Bernie, one of his most treasured favorite pieces, the Bach E minor sonata. Lorna.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would love to speak a little bit more generally about Bernie's legacy. And first of all, I want to say it was an honor to know him, to meet him. And it's also a huge honor to sit in his chair in the symphony here. Like Whit, I didn't know Bernie all that well, but I was very keenly aware and somewhat in awe of the link with the past that Bernie represented. I saw in him a kind of elder statesman of the musical community, a keeper of knowledge and tradition, like an elder of the tribe. And this tradition is an oral tradition, full of life and energy. It can't be written down, it can only be transmitted. Daniel Barenboim, the famous conductor and piano player, said, there are 2 types of musicians. For some, making music is a way to make a living, and by contrast, for others, music is a way of life. Bernie was definitely in this second, more vibrant category, music as a way of life. And as Wib says, you know, they shared many of the same values, having studied with the god of the flute, Marcel Moyes. And so coming to Pittsburgh, I was very aware, it felt very comforting and very familiar as well, you know, a certain sense of being very at home immediately because of Bernie's legacy. You meet people in life sometimes who have gone before you and show you how it should be done. And I would say that about Bernie. And the qualities that he represents and that I hope to emulate are this incredible dedication and devotion to music, and to always be communicative when you're making music, never just to play the notes, but to be saying something, to be storytelling, to be always alive to the music, whether as a performer or as a listener. I was very touched by Wendy's stories about how moved he would be when he would play operatic arias, you know, recordings for his students, and be moved to tears. That's a very special sensitivity, and it's not just being a great performer, that's part of music as a way of life. I love and will try to emulate the fact that he wanted to pass on what he knew and his passion and his enthusiasm to the next generation. And I should mention that my friend Lindsay Nova, who runs the Three Rivers Young People's Orchestra, told me last night that she's very sad not to be here today, and with her colleagues from the Three Rivers Youth Orchestra, because they have a conductor search today. And it's sad that they can't be here, but it's also ironic, and in a way it's very fitting, because it's a great tribute to Bernie that what he started is flourishing and doing so well. Another of the qualities that has impressed me about Bernie is this desire to always keep learning throughout your life, and the fact that he met Wib, for example, at Moises classes, and would attend classes, you know, long after he was a very established professional player. I think that is a remarkable humility, and also says a lot about his capacity as a human being. And the other thing that I love is this dedication to creating community through music. There's a beautiful quotation by the composer Malcolm Arnold: "Music is the social act of communication among people, a gesture of friendship, the strongest there is." And I think from everything I know about Bernie, he lived that. It's incredible the positive influence that one person can have on another's life. When I think about the influence of Moise, and what a huge figure he was to Bernie, what a huge figure he was to William Bennett, and then in turn, what a huge figure William Bennett has been in my life, that influence is something to be cherished and celebrated. It's obvious that Bernie had that same capacity as Moise to inspire others as Moise had inspired him. So, in keeping with the Moise connection, there's a beautiful quotation of Moises. He said, "I long ago observed that the real beauty of the sound comes from the generosity of the heart. While I know Bernie could be a tough teacher, that underlying generosity of spirit is clearly something Bernie passed on to his students. And I can see that from a mile off in the work of Wendy Coomer and Craig Johnson with the Flute Academy and the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony, and passing those values forward. So I value the legacy and great community that Bernie helped to create here in Pittsburgh and in the flute world in general. We have a lot to be thankful for. And lastly, I'd like to share with you one quotation by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, which kind of sums up, I think, that generosity of spirit and the passion and that oral tradition. That when you want to teach somebody to sail, you don't just teach them to nail together the parts of the boat. You teach them to have a great desire and a great love of the sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna, Ann, and Justin. That was really beautiful performance. Thank you so much. You heard Mr. Bennett refer to the video that had a picture of Marcel Moïse, and there's a reason that that's there, and now is the time in the program where we have this video presentation. Some years ago, there was a French film made, for French TV about the life of Marcel Moïse, and for many years it was only in French. So we got a copy of it and got the permission to add subtitling to it. And so this was a project undertaken by the Marcel Moïse Society, with which I'm involved, and we added the English subtitles to the film. And then Bernie recorded a video introduction to the film, and now that is part of the film, and the Marcel Moïse Society is distributing the film. So I would like to now play for you the introduction that has Bernie introducing his mentor and the god of the flute, Marcel Moïse.
And I had the pleasure of an inspirational study with Marcel Moïse from 1955 to about 1972. Often took me every place so that I would understand better what went into becoming the great artist that he was. The magical name Marcel Moïse. He took me all through these beautiful landscapes, showed me what entered into his soul, into his aesthetic formation to become the great artist that he was in his imagination, his poetry. He was a painter. He studied painting in one of the great schools in Paris, and he always talked about the organization of space, the organization of time in a piece of music. His playing was so full of imagination and poetry, and at the same time he was very strict. He would not allow people to just make things up. His first impression of me was not very favorable. I've been in correspondence for years, since I was in high school. He would say, "Do you come to learn, or do you come to show off?" And he would really demolish anybody who thought, "I'm principal flute, this place or that place." My career is such a... Because he had the most illustrious career, and it was not the career which was of concern to him, it was the music, and communicating the love of music and the love that's in the music to our audiences. The first session was Handel, flute, violin, and the keyboard sonata. When that ended, we went off in the corridor and cried a little bit because we had been in correspondence for so long and so much had happened in between. I had lost so many of my family in Paris and of course in Poland. Then we started a relationship which was has been very meaningful for me, and I hope that it rewarded Mr. Moïse as well. I was with him in his nursing home just a month or two before he passed away. And he was still giving me lessons and singing, and he was a wonderfully expressive face. At the age of 80, he was still young. He was not tired and used up. You see that expressive face, and the life, his love of music, his excitement about it, all that one imagines to open one's heart and share with the audience. In order to do that, you have to have the facility to do that. But as you can see from this movie, and certainly from his teaching, everything started with the music, not from the technique. If you read out and couldn't manage, then he would help. But everything was based upon the music and the love that the music represents. So this is, for me, a new inspiration every day when I have any contact with any of the memories of Marcel Moïse. I'm re-inspired and I want to become a better flute player. I hope that you will also enjoy this recording and be inspired to improve your own playing and to realize that the art is what's important. Everything else is a means. But the end is communication. If you love the music, let the people know about it. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Or I can speak here, that's...
Oh, it's better if you come up here, then they can see you and hear you.
My name is Mark Priori. I'm an elementary music teacher, and there isn't anything more genuine than seeing the joy the children express through music. And it's so innocent and it's so beautiful. And even, no matter how out of tune or it may technically not be very good sometimes, but just experiencing that joy with children is just an incredible thing. And it was, Bernie always had that joy throughout his life. And there's a day goes by when I teach that I don't hear him and try, make sure that I'm true to the things that he tried to teach me, as far as we need to make the expression of our music and our humanity true, and the egos, there's no place for egos or putting ourselves up higher than other people. It's really about the message that music has and the humanity that we share through our music. And there's all these, every day I hear his voice and about making things the best we can, being as sincere through our music and as transparent and as humanitarian as we can through our music. And it was just, to me, that was something that I treasure more and more each day. And I do have, there is a little bit of off-center humor that Bernie did have that I always enjoyed. There was always something with pencils. There would be a few pencils sitting there, and he'd go through, he'd look at them like he was analyzing, just, oh, that's a good one. He'd pick that up. I don't know why that always hit me as sort of funny. I still look at bulbs and pencils today and wonder which ones Bernie would think were good. But what a treasure knowing him as a human being, and thank you for letting me speak. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Jessica Valiente, and I studied with Mr. Goldberg in New York City. I'm not from Pittsburgh. I'm one of the Brooklyn students. Is anybody else, one of his students from New York? Did anybody else come out from the East Coast? No, I guess I'll have to tell everybody how it was when I get there. I was his doctoral student at Brooklyn College. I did my doctorate in flute at the CUNY, the City University of New York, and Brooklyn is one of the campuses, and so I would go out to Brooklyn for my lessons with him. And this was a very transformative time in my career. I was a mess. I had chosen him from the choices of teachers because I was having a chronic pain thing, and my colleagues and friends had all told me that he was reputed to be very sensitive and aware about good performer health, healthy performance habits, which he was indeed, and he was very helpful. And he also decided to change my embouchure, which was frustrating. And so I depended on his guidance and mentorship very greatly. And he gave me a lot of attention. And he also, as a doctoral student, he created many opportunities, which I did not think I was ready for nor deserved, but he had a lot of confidence. He was incredibly generous, and he went out of his way to introduce me to certain conductors or, you know, pedagogy things and send me students, and I'm very grateful for that. And I have two sweet stories. One of them will be familiar to, I think, many of you, and then one of them maybe not so much. So when I was preparing for my first doctoral recital, the program we had to do 3, so the first one, and we were talking about repertoire and what we were going to play. And he really wanted me to do the Camille Saint-Saëns, the Air de Ballet de d'Ascanio. Maybe some of you have studied it. And it wasn't the sort of repertoire that I usually would have chosen, but I wanted to, you know, make him happy. So I got the music, and we studied it, and I gave it to my accompanist. And when it came time to bring my accompanist in for him to coach us, this is the first time that we're going to play it from beginning to end, perform it for him, and then let him coach, you know, from that point. So as soon as we began to play, and you have to understand, at this point he was in his 70s. This was in the middle 90s. So he was in his 70s, and for all of my lessons, he was always seated. You know, he rarely, you know, got up or walked around the room. And this is at Brooklyn College. Really, very seldom got up. As soon as we began to play, he got up and he began to dance around the room, just whirl and twirl around and jump around and have a great time like a 4-year-old in a tutu. It was amazing. And I was like, that's what I want to never lose. That this is really amazing, that joy over this piece, that's something that I never, you know, want to lose. So I get the impression some of you have seen that kind of thing all the time, but for me it was different, and it was a treat. I can still see it in my head, and you know, it was many years ago. And then the other thing was my very last lesson in 1998, and speaking of his generosity, you know, the program I was in only pays for 2 years of lessons, even though you have to give 3 recitals. So that last recital is unguided, you put it together without guidance. Maybe that's the point. But he said, if you want to come back for some more lessons before the 3rd one, like see how you're feeling, and you're always welcome to come back. So I did come back for a few more, and after the 3rd recital was over and I was going to have my last lesson, I thought that I would just do a little something for him as a treat. So I play a lot of jazz. My degrees are all in classical performance, but I play a lot of jazz. I teach in the Jazz Studies department at the New School of New York City. And it seemed to me that Mr. Goldberg was of a generation, and also for the cities that he lived in, that he grew up with jazz all around him, whether he played it or not. I think that jazz was completely unavoidable in St. Louis, Pittsburgh, New York City, you know, that he was surrounded by jazz. And there's a jazz standard called Bernie's Tune. And it's sometimes attributed to Bernie Miller and sometimes to Jerry Mulligan. Anyway, it's a tune that I was already playing in my repertoire before I met him. So whenever I hear other people call him Bernie, I call him Mr. Goldberg. But people called him Bernie, I would think Bernie's tune. So I thought, you know what, let's play that for him, just as like a send-off. This is my last lesson. So I had my pianist show up, same pianist as the Sanson. I had my pianist show up, and he sat there. I said, Mr. Goldberg, I want to play a little something for you. This is a jazz standard. It's called Bernie's Tune. He said, oh, okay. He was very excited. So we played it, and when we were done, you know, it was really remarkable because I never thought of him this way, and I don't know where he absorbed such things, but he really actually had some very constructive things to say about some things that are really specific to jazz, like about, swing and articulation and things. So I was very impressed by his own knowledge of, outside his field. And every single day I say something to one of my students, and he said to me, all my students know Mr. Goldberg sings, and we will all miss him.
I was 22 years old when I got my job in the Pittsburgh Symphony, sitting next to 67-year-old Bernie Goldberg. And 22-year-olds know everything, right? I had made the conscious decision that I was not going to know everything. I was going to sit down and I was going to learn from him. I learned a lot of off-center humor. But my one little story that I'd like to share, we were on tour in 1991. We did Japan, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Bernie, I showed up at the hall one day, I believe it was in Hong Kong, and somebody said, have you seen Bernie? I said, no, is there a problem? They said, go take a look, he went and got his hair dyed. Where in Hong Kong they have one color, jet black. It's a little dark on him, but it was great. Anyways, I learned a lot from him. I'm grateful for the time that I spent with him in the orchestra, and it's been years that we've missed him already, or at least me. But I'm grateful for this gathering and for everyone who's come to support him.
Hi, my name is Don Schock. If I could give something from the perspective of the youth orchestras, it's been quite a few years, 40 years since I was under Bernie, Mr. Goldberg, but that was my introduction to him. What I wanted to add really was just that it reinforces the emotional aspect of music. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking of aside from his time and what he taught us, but to bring and start a group and bring this group of young students together and communicate with them on the level of emotion. So you take a group of young people and you put them in a room together. And these are all students who have spent an inordinate amount of their time alone in a room, working through the technical aspects of their instruments in their young lives, and communicating with us on this level of emotion, both personally and connecting us with us that way, but also talking about the music in that way. It's remarkable that somebody who had that gift to give us was there to do it at that time. A wonderful gift. Two short stories. One was the day that Bernie came in to the orchestra rehearsal. I don't remember him ever coming late, so maybe I was late. He came in and he was flush. He was crying, and he mounted the podium and he took off his glasses, cleaned them with his handkerchief, and said, "Pablo is dead." And instead of a rehearsal right away, we were regaled with a half an hour of stories about Pablo Casals. And unfortunately, I don't remember those stories, but I do remember the emotional impact. The second I want to relate to is, this was the first time I was in a real orchestra, and what a thrill as a young person, even sitting in the back of the orchestra on a brass instrument, but it was just unbelievable. And I remember the first Haydn symphony we played, Verma, and he stopped us in the middle. It was probably the trio, I don't know, but he said, you know what Haydn is? And this is something we can all think about after this, Bernie. Haydn is, Haydn is this surprise, this wonder, and I think of that every time I listen to Haydn, because you're going through it, and what was that? There's a little figure in the second violins that I never heard. They're going down when the firsts are going up, or maybe it's the inside and outside chair, and it's just all these little things that came up, and it's always burning. Thank you.
I hope I'm going to be able to hold it together for this. I'll give you a little anecdote. 2 years ago, there was a paper published in Science which explains why when the curtain goes up on Parsifal, I just start bawling. There's a gene that's been discovered that causes heightened emotion, and in my family, we must have 10 copies of it. So I'm going to try and hold it together. But every time I played for Bernie, it was such an honor and an emotional experience, I just start blubbering away. I'll probably do it today. I want to say a little bit about the Bach Sonata that was played. I've studied with Bernie for over 50 years, both formally and informally, and every class where the Bach E minor Sonata was played, he always said to me he wanted this played at his funeral. So I'm so glad we were able to do that. Thank you, Lorna, and the others. I think Bernie would be very pleased and happy that his wish was granted. The other thing that I will remark on is that while I was trained initially as a flutist, I became a very successful, high-powered scientist working in the field of immunology. And everybody I worked with was just astounded at the philosophy I brought to doing basic scientific research. And I explained to them that it was all these principles I learned from Bernie in the French flute tradition through him, learning from Barrère, learning from Moïse. Those are so immensely powerful tools to think that it really gave me an edge in my work, really at the most elite universities in the country. And it's something that musicians don't necessarily understand how transferable these skills are that Bernie taught us, but they are immensely important in every endeavor you do. At least they have been for me. So I'll start on my prepared remarks now. In January 2015, I had the great honor to introduce Bernie, a flutist described by his long-term music director of the Pittsburgh Symphony, William Steinberg, as his incomparable flutist. And that inscription is over there on the wall. The event was the biennial Chicago Flute Club Flute Festival, of which I'm a life member, and Bernie was the honored flutist. When Florence Nelson, who was the organizer of the event, asked me to introduce Bernie at a dinner honoring him, she noted that Bernie is known for his wonderful storytelling, and would I introduce him by way of some of these wonderful stories. Now, being a nerdy scientist, I gladly accepted, but then I started to analyze everything like scientists do. So when I started to sketch out what to say, I realized that over the 50 years that I had known Bernie, the stories, which were always wonderful in themselves, have always served, this is genetics, have always served a greater purpose. So I thought I would share with you not the stories themselves, but the purposes they served, and how Bernie so artfully used them to inspire, teach, and illustrate important lessons that, at least for me, have taken my lifetime to understand, and which have served to guide me in my journey through life. Now, many of the things I'm going to talk about are arrayed around these tables. I'm going to give you some context and how to understand them. Mr. Goldberg's storytelling started upon entering his home Not with him telling you a story, because as many would say, he wasn't always there yet. But it was always with a visual story. And he's lived in a large house in Pittsburgh for close to almost 70 years. And it was as a high school student that I first walked up the steps, entered it, and began to learn these stories. As many of you here know, Mr. Goldberg taught in what was essentially a large entry foyer, which was rich with photos and objects used in his teaching at all levels of accomplishment. When you walked in to this large entry foyer, to the left, immediately upon entering, there was a large photo of Paul Taffanel, taken in Taffanel's garden sometime around 1905, showing perfect hand position and embouchure. And Bernie always said it was hard to see through all the facial shrubbery. Much like mine today is. That photograph is over there. Straight ahead was a snapshot of George Barrère taken at Chautauqua in the late 1930s by the father of his long-term PSO colleague, Ethan Stang, one of the most wonderful piccolo players, in my estimation, who ever lived. Above the mantle was a still life with 8 key and minor system flutes and various mementos from his students and his travels. On the mantle was a flute stand made from gears taken from steel-making machinery, and on this stand was his magnificent gold flute, Powell number 1242, made in 1953, and on which he played without interruption the rest of his career. On the right was a large window facing southwest, which he used to discuss proper lighting, color of the sound, and projection. See that iris over there? Match the sound. Make it go there. There's a window. Make it go there. It is just magical. Turning to enter the next room, there was a photo of Brahms taken by a photographer in West Virginia, and there's a long story about that. There was a wonderful Steinway piano, bound scores of operas and symphonies, and recordings of importance on acetate, vinyl, cassette, and CD. He spanned quite a technological range in his lifetime. The next room was a large sitting room filled with autographed photos. Many of these are around here, dedicated to Mr. Goldberg from William Steinberg, Pablo Casals, Marcel Lees, and many others. Over the 50 years I studied with Bernie, these cues did not change. Some were added, but this was the basic visual repertoire that he used to set the stage. Each of these visual cues had its own story, and sometimes several stories, and served as the starting point for a multitude of stories exemplifying and explaining the development of the French school of flute playing, the rules and principles of that tradition, the legacy of great musicians such as Casals, Luis, and Steinberg, and most importantly, how one could use all of these to train the mind and fire the imagination in the creation of musical art. And of course, he had wonderful and sometimes naughty stories of people and personalities. But even then, amidst the gossip, or at least seeming gossip, there was always a didactic purpose, which he used to exemplify important concepts, either of music, or how to behave, how to be a good person, how to make your way in the world. There were just so many stories. For most of us here in the 21st century, it's difficult to comprehend the immediacy and reach of the French tradition for Bernie. When speaking with flutists about the traditions from whence they came, one's tradition is usually defined by one's teacher and the teacher of one's teacher. For most, this usually goes back 30, maybe 50 years. For Mr. Goldberg, it was essentially beyond our comprehension. So Goldberg studied with Barrère at the Juilliard School in the early 1940s, and with Marcel Moïse from the early 1950s, really, not as Bernie said, until 1972, but really up until the very end. As Bernie mentioned there, Moïse was always doing something to help Bernie move along. Barrere's teachers were primarily Henri Altez, who was born in 1826 and graduated the Paris Conservatory in 1842. 1 century now, just from Barrere to his teacher. Barrere also studied with Paul Taffanel, who was born in 1842 and graduated from the Paris Conservatory in 1860 under Vincent Dourou after 1 year of study. Moïse's teachers were students of Altez, primarily Hennevenz and Goldberg, as well as Taffanel. Together, Altez and Taffanel, directly or through their students, including Moïse, trained the cohort of flutists we have come to think of as embodying the French tradition of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. 2 of these flutists, Georges Barrere and Georges Laurent, came to America, Barrere in 1905, Laurent in 1918. And those 2 men trained Bernie's first teachers. John Keibert Sr., when Barrere came in 1905, left his position as principal of the St. Louis Symphony and spent a year with Barrere in New York. The impact was profound. Tourneau studied with Laurent later. But these 2 men were Bernie's high school teachers. What a legacy. What a start in life. Together, Barrere and Laurent, and through their students, transformed the symphonic flute section in U.S. orchestras from a predominantly German-influenced approach to a French approach. Mr. Goldberg carried that tradition on for close to half a century before retiring from the PSO in 1993, and he continued that tradition concurrently and afterwards through his teaching of many, many generations of flute players. Now, what I just told you, I had Bernie, because I was going to introduce Bernie, I didn't want him to jump up in the middle of my little speech at the Chicago Flute Club and go, no! So he reviewed this and agreed with what I was going to say. But I must tell you, I made the mistake of showing him a draft that I had not done a final grammar check on because I thought he was going to extensively review it. Within 5 seconds of handing him the paper, he said, this is wrong. Nothing got past him. In concluding, Bernie was not a braggart. However, he was deeply aware of the mantle he wore from this tradition and was very serious about conveying it to succeeding generations. During the last 10 years or so, I had the great honor to spend time with Bernie, about an evening each week, discussing this tradition with him, his place within it, and how all these little bits of this mosaic that we've all seen, how they all fit together. So many stories came to bear on our discussion, stories about Casals, Barrere, Moïse, contemporary flutists and their traditions, the important lessons that one can learn from playing vintage flutes, especially Louis Lott and flutes made by Vern Q. Powell. And there were stories right up until the very last time we had the opportunity to talk in depth in September of last year. And I'll echo one of the stories that had been told to us earlier about Bernie being able to hear through 5 doors. I collect Louis Lott flutes and Powell flutes made by Mr. Powell. I had the opportunity to bring in a very early plated Louis Lott, and for one of my lessons about 10 years ago. And I was warming up on the 3rd floor of his house while he was teaching a young girl who would come weekly from Cleveland for lessons. So I'm blowing very softly. All of a sudden, the door bursts open. He says, "Bring that downstairs." "What are you playing?" And then we had a long lesson. This poor little girl had to play this Louis lot that had different key structures. And we had a long lesson about the importance of Louis lots, what they can teach you, how they, and air management and so forth. But it was the more than 5 doors there. And ears like a bat. In concluding, Bernie, you've inspired us and given us the tools to think, analyze, and develop our own voices within the print tradition in our journeys through life, whether they be making music, making science, making personal relationships. You're missed. I don't know what I'm going to do on Wednesday nights now. I can't go. It was such a great honor to have been a small part of your life, and for you to have been such a large part of mine. What I've learned, I carry with me for the rest of my life, and I now try to share that with others. So, Craig made a mention of a website. So, in honor of Bernie, I've put together a website. It's very simple to find it. BZG, his initials, theflutemagnificent.com. Now, The Flute Magnificent was the title of Vern Q. Powell's inaugural brochure advertising his start as a flute maker when he left Haynes Flutes. So that's how you can think of remembering it. So bcg.theflutemagnificent.com, all one word. Eventually, this site will be an exploration of Powell flutes and the flutes that inspired him, primarily Louis Locke flutes, but I have to retire to get to that point. I've started populating it with things that I have. I'll continue to do that. One of the things that I found was a recording of Bernie of the Bach sonatas, all 6, plus the A minor unaccompanied sonata. I had hoped to have it up before I came here, but unfortunately it's arriving today in the mail, having transcribed it from reel-to-reel to MP3. I will put those up. The recording that Bernie made of Weber and Duschek trios with the music of Weber trio. You've seen the poster around here. That is up already. I implore you, if you have recordings or memorabilia for Bernie, please post them. If you have a question about how to do it, please write to me, and I'll help you do it. edwardsbird@gmail.com. Not hard. It was in my email address was in the first mass emailing that Craig had sent out. If you have recordings, cassettes, reel-to-reel, whatever they are, I hope you'll send them to me. I'll bear the cost of converting them to MP3 and share them back with you and post them. Bernie was extraordinarily cavalier, as we learned today, with not only his music collection, but also with his recorded legacy. In fact, he gave away his last recording of his trio, and I had to go on Amazon and find another one for him as a birthday present. He was that's just who he was. If it could serve someone better than sitting in his cabinet, he wanted that to happen. So in honor of Bernie, please send me what you can. And Lorna, I hope you will talk with the PSO management of making some of his recordings available with the orchestra. He did a number of premieres, the Barclay Concerto, Alba by Milkiers, I think his name is. I've been reading some of the press clippings from the 60s. Bernie was an important premiere artist. He premiered lots of things. he missed out on premiering the Prokofiev Flute Sonata because there was a glitch, there was a Cold War glitch. And so it was postponed, and by the time he got the rights back, it was done in New York. They were a little bit faster. But he was at the forefront of contemporary music and thought it was really important. Pittsburgh used to have a contemporary music festival in the 50s. See that look? These were recorded. If there's any possibility of making these available of this extraordinary flutist, please help us do it. If it's only within our family of his students, but they deserve to be heard because it is, as you will hear from the Weber that I posted, it is playing with incomparable beauty. He learned his lessons well from Moise, and it is just so gorgeous. Anyway, I will stop. Thank you very much.